I think I can.
Okay, sorry about the disruption, everybody. We had some technical issues with our previous platform, but we are back now. Apologies for the interruption, but I'd like to reintroduce Amanda. So I think, Amanda, it might be best if you can just start your presentation from the start again. And yeah, so thank you, and over to you, Amanda. Thanks.
Hey everyone. Let me share my screen here. And okay. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, yeah, I can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, sounds good. So hey everyone again. Thank you for joining. I'd like to share with you today my experience working on a project from beginning to now at Microsoft. So it was really like a startup experience being inside a big tech company. So that was really interesting, and it had a lot of learnings that I can share with you. So I was one of the founding members of the shopping product that I'll explain in details that already saved more than $2 billion in savings. So let's get into it. A little bit about myself first. I am from Brazil, and today I work in Seattle, Washington. I have a master's in computer science, more specifically like computer graphics. And exactly today, I'm completing 3 years as software engineer at Microsoft. I am like a full stack engineer, but I specialize a lot in the UX since I started this project. My goal for this talk is to give you a set of action steps and some learnings that you can use to solidify your startup project. So a little bit more about the product. It's a shopping assistant default on the Edge browser. So if you have Edge browser, you probably saw this before. You don't have to install anything. And it finds deals and makes sure you have the best price when you shop online. So it goes from coupons to cashback to compare with other retailers and so on. So let me just show you a quick commercial on what the product is, just to give a bit more context.
Meet the Turner twins. They chill. They compete. They cruise. They do everything together. Except... Wait, this isn't mine. You don't use Edge to shop? Microsoft Edge is the best browser for shopping. Download it yourself.
Cool. So our journey so far really started as an idea. So we had the idea. I know maybe you're familiar with Honey. Is an extension that I have to install, and it has the coupons that it auto applies for you. That's kind of where we started. And our goal was to be default on the Edge browser, because that way we could get like 1 million users like overnight. But first we had to prove the idea and prove it would work. So we started with simple like browser extension and made sure that the technical we could do the technical part of it, which is like get the coupons and auto apply coupons. That was like the first main feature that we have. And eventually we're default on Edge. And with that, like a lot of other things and changes came up. So I will go into details. And as you can see on these two like images, our visual identity also changed a lot. On the left, we're just like, we could like try whatever we wanted to try, like experiment with different designs and animations. And on the right side, we had to follow more of the Edge identity and the Edge visual identity. So people wouldn't think we are a third-party extension, but also like part of the browser. And so we began that in 2020. We had 4 people in the team, including my manager. We created that browser extension, and we had just coupons and price comparison. Fast forward for today, we have more than 10 devs. We are default on the Edge browser. We have more than 20 features. So I will show a bit like of the challenges of that growth and also what we learned. Here's a list of action steps, and let's go into details. The first one is A/B experiments. If you're not familiar with A/B experiments, it's basically a control experiment where part of like some of your changes that you want to do goes to a group of users, and the rest of users continue getting the same experience as before. And that is good because then you can compare both groups and see if your change, like improved or maybe make the product worse or even like flat. And that is really good, especially when I was starting a product. That was one of the first setups that we had in our project, because when you are new and creating a project from scratch, there are a lot of ideas, a lot of hypotheses. People wanted to try new things. And A/B experiment was a good way for us to safely try new ideas without necessarily like being afraid of causing like a big DSAT on our product. Also, it was good to support hypotheses. So if you have something that we want to try and want to do, so for example, even when we became default on Edge, we have to prove through like with data that, like our feature was beneficial and not like making the browser worse. That can also justify business decisions and so on. Everything we do today is behind an A/B experiment, so we can back up afterwards. I think now we have more than 60 experiments, and they run like in parallel, and like we have a lot. So, but they don't tell the full story. So it's also important to do the user research and really talk to users, because A/B experiments are like just numbers. And with user research, you can get really into like the details of what you can do better. And it can be like a long user research where you have multiple participants and like long hours of interviews, or you can have like short ones, but that happen more frequently. So you might be familiar with continuous discovery. So that can also be an option. We did like both approaches. So this first one was like a shorter user research, but we found out some interesting things. For example, we used to have those images on the left in our UI after we were default on Edge, and we found out that users didn't like those images. So that was really interesting. That is something that an A/B experiment would hardly tell us, but by talking to users, we were able to identify this issue and remove those images to save a bit more space, and also make the kind of reset the UX to be really like part of the browser. But we didn't want it to end just that. We thought the UX is a bit flat. So we did a bigger user research, and so that was like multiple interviews, long hours to get to uplift our designs a little bit. And with that, we added a lot more colors and like some modern elements like emojis and this kind of things. And it still try to make the feature appear trustworthy, because that's one of our main goals. And for this user research, I actually participated as a listener. I'm a developer, but I'm not qualified to do the user research, but it was really helpful for me to be there and participate, because that could help me understand the path that the designers were taking. And I don't think that happened very often where a developer participates on the process. But yeah, I'll talk a little bit more on the learnings, because that really helps the teams to work together and unify, so everyone is following the same direction. Another little thing that we add is this feedback thing, so people could also add feedback in our UI directly, so we can always get that and act upon it. And then afterwards, this was August 2021, we did this full refresh of the UX, but then we had to step back a little bit, in my opinion, in terms of designs because of a business decision. So you always have to be prepared for this kind of situations as well. And at the same time, don't stop to experiment and prove, like your hypothesis through A/B experiment. Because so basically, Edge had this new feature where they added this bar, like vertical bar on the right side with a lot of features that you can have like right there on the browser. And one of them is our feature, like Microsoft Shopping. So because we couldn't like just do whatever we wanted in terms of designs, because now all the features needed to talk among themselves. So that's why we have to go back to a more follow the colors of the browser and be a bit more serious, let's say, in terms of our designs. So the next action steps are like add logs to your features. So that will help you get the quantitative, I have a very hard time with this word, status of your feature. And you can log many things. Some like straightforward things are daily active users, like how many users are using your feature every day. Also, this is really important, like errors, like make sure you have a system that you can see those errors in real time so you can act upon them really fast. Also, user behavior, like have logs for user behavior, like are using clicking on that feature, are using interacting with your feature. Especially like if you're growing your product from zero, is not established yet, you have to be prepared to move and adapt. So it's not because a feature showed an improvement to your product before that feature continues to do so. So always keep an eye on it, because you might have to kill a feature and that's fine. But it's important to be always updated. And also something that is really important to measure that is not given a lot of care, especially at the beginning, is performance, because performance can really impact your product. If your product seems to be slow, people might just leave it and not come back. And performance is important to measure on machines that are not as fast as your machine. I particularly usually get the 75th percentile of all the measures. So I have an idea of how long, my product is taking to load on a slower machine. And the products we use to get all of these logs and make sense of our data and make sense of how users are interacting with our system. One is Azure Data Explorer with Custom Database, Power BI, and then Clarity. So the first one I think is well known. It's Azure is an analytics platform for big data and where you can see data in real time. That's how we get the errors fast and we can fix it right away. And then all your data we get in Azure, we create dashboards and reports in Power BI, so people outside of our team can get metrics in a way that is easier to ingest, and also keep up to date. They don't have to ask us for new data. We can automatically refresh the data in Power BI, and everything can be tracked easily. And the third one is Clarity. This one is really cool because it's a newish feature and it's free. So, and it helps you to understand and learn how users are using your feature or your website, for example. So basically on the left side, you can see one of our UIs, and you can see the UI is a bit weird because Clarity do some changes in the UI to protect user privacy. But the mouse action, and you can see where the user went on that particular UI. So it's good to understand if users are having any blockings with your feature, how you can help them. And also they have a lot of other features. Another cool one is a heat map. So if you see on the right, you can see the parts where it's really red are the parts that users are clicking the most. So you can see that they are trying to click on the image. And this title here that we're not doing anything. We didn't add a click functionality to that, but people were clicking on it to get more information. So based on this report, we are able to identify this, issue that user have and update the UI to do something about it. And that is something that you can really get from logs. So that's why it's really nice to have Clarity. And then next action step is to unite devs, PMs, and designers. I feel like usually those areas like stay within a realm and just output things to the other realms. And as I was saying about the user research, it's so nice to when you can collaborate in a way that everyone understands each other and it's not like just action steps that you keep sending to the other team. We got better when we unified this process more. So because like communication is very complex, so if you have just like these separated realms, and this is just to illustrate how communication can get very complex, like for every people, like there are dots, we have like communication lines. So you can see that with 14 people we already have 91 lines of communication. So you have to have a process. There are ways to reduce those communications issues. And I'll just share like 3 that I think it works very well. One is to keep people on the loop, and don't assume, like just because someone has a technical role, they might not, like they don't have interest in understanding the user or understanding, like design directions. I'm not saying that, like everyone should have an opinion on things or like on design or user research, because everyone has your own like specialized in something, and you have to respect that. But at the same time, people can understand points of view, and that is the same for the opposite. So I feel like there's always like a conflict point where like designs create these really nice things and they share with developers, and developers are like, we cannot do this. So that is very frustrating, and I think a lot of developers miss to communicate the right technical limitations the engineers have in some areas. And by communicating those limitations, because everything can be done, right? Everything can be done. It just depends like on how many time you have, how many resources you have. So if you have a limitation that is limiting a really cool design, maybe like both designers and engineering team can communicate that with the leadership, and then the leadership might consider prioritizing fixing that limitation. So that actually really helped, because after we communicate the correct limitations, what the designers would usually do is they would share the design with, like, considering you don't have a limitation and an alternative design. So the leadership can be, okay, if you really like this design on the left, you need to allow the engineering team to take the time to fix a limitation. Does that make sense? And then third, use tools to keep everyone on the same page. Figma is already well known, and also we've recently added Storybook as well. So Storybook, for those that doesn't know, like you basically create stories of different elements that you have on your product. It can be like as specific as you want, or like you can have a more complex story, and that has been really helpful, especially for designers to evaluate, like design regressions, fit and finish that they want to do, and also to access certain scenarios that are harder to trigger on, like real time. So by having a story there, they can just go to a link real easy and just communicate with the developer and what needs to be changed. Next is tests. We want to prevent, errors from reaching users, right? And then we have many different types of tests. One is unit tests, is very well known. We use Just for our product, but to be honest, we don't have a lot of unit tests as we should be, because on a startup, everything seems good in theory, right? We have to add tests for every feature, for every function we add. Realistically, we were a lot of fast development have the priority over those kind of safeguards. Instead, we added a more general safeguard at the beginning, which was having a staging phase. Basically, when we do like a change in the code, instead of sending to everyone at once, we have this staging phase where we send the feature, like the product for like the update for a group of users. And then, like after a few hours, we verify logs. And if they are okay, we continue, the development, the pushing out the changes. And another test that is actually pretty cool is visual parity test. So we've been using Task Cafe because it's free and it didn't require any we didn't have to set up anything very complex to start using it. However, it's really simple. And I know like Storybook has a really nice one that is chromatic. We also explored that path, but since Task Cafe was simpler to set up, we went for that. And just a tip here, both Storybook and Task Cafe was like new features that I was trying to, like create the culture in our team to keep adding stories, to keep adding visual parity tasks. So my idea here was to combine those two. So the Task Cafe, the task will run on Storybook stories instead of the actual environment, because one of the reasons, because it's harder since our feature is on like an extension, the browser is not like a link that I can go to. But that also helped because now people, if they want the benefits of locking in what they developed, so there is no regression and visually, they have to add that to Storybook. So one pushes the other, and then like I can keep both updated. And just to demonstrate how it works, like the image on the left is like the expected image that the system is expecting, and that is retrieved directly from Figma. So like what the designers like did, like I just use that to create my visual parity task so that I make sure that my UX is polished. And then if there is a change that regresses it, it will show on the image on the middle. You can see that the image was like zoomed in because of a change. And then the third one, it also outputs like the difference in pixels. So it basically compares like pixel by pixel, and things needs to be like matching. But even if you add a lot of tasks and everything, it's possible that your system will fail for some error or something. So it's also important to fail gracefully as much as you can, so you don't compromise your reputation, like especially as a new feature. So a new product, sorry. So like one way is to really like organize your code, your feature. So it fails like per feature, not the entire thing. So maybe users are seeing just a small part of what your product is because the RAS like had an error or something, but at least they are seeing something. And most of the time they won't know, right? There is something broken. And then of course, I'm sure you're logging all of this and tracking all of this so you can fix right away. Next, we are almost there, is documentation. When you're new, also like same way as tasks, you kind of push back this kind of things to like ship faster. But it's really important to keep a track of the documentation so people that are new can help right away. Your expectation is to grow, and that includes hiring more people. So it's good to have like people being able to ramp up really fast. One nice thing that one of our colleagues in our team did was create these learning sessions every other week. So people that were there in the team for longer could talk about, like a specific part of the product, like could be the code architecture, could be how we log things, could be, how to analyze our metrics and all of that. And all of those learning sessions were recorded, so new people could also access the previous ones. So that was really cool. And, like that would require like once you have everyone in a meeting for 30 minutes, 1 hour, and, that really helps people that are joining. So to finalize, let me share like the learnings that we have besides the action steps that I shared. So the first one is that people need to be aligned on priorities and goals, and that should include everyone. Don't assume because people are like from the design team, they don't have interest in knowing, your technical limitations, and the other way around. Also, data is your friend. Always lead with data. As I said, it's really easy on a new product. Everyone has ideas. Everyone have something to contribute, but you also want to make sure you are still going to the right direction. And for that, like A/B test can be really your friend there, and lead with data. Third one, create best practices and safeguards that make sense to your team and product. I know like in paper, like thing doesn't always look transferred to the real world. So, do adaptations to your own environment. For example, we had a limitation that we couldn't use React, and React is something like when you talk about UX, you immediately think of React, but we couldn't use it. So we had to adapt, and that's fine. next, don't try to convince or change a culture. Like I wanted to introduce a Storybook and visual parity tasks, but I cannot just say, okay, now you have to do like every feature, you have to, add a task, add Storybook, because people just think of that as another to-do list. Instead, like you should show an example, make it easy, and promote the benefits. For example, every time the visual parity task catches something, I'm promoting it. I'm saying, okay, this could go out, but the visual parity task was there. So, in the same way, like if something goes wrong, I'm like, if we had visual parity task for that, that shouldn't happen. And, like that, with that, people will start seeing the benefits and the change happens more organically. Next, your product will never be perfect, so don't be afraid to experiment. We have, as I said, we have a lot of experiments going on in parallel. And lastly, don't forget about the power of shipping. Don't wait for a product to be perfect before you start sending sending it to the user, because you might get things that you couldn't have on the development phase. Also, someone else might put the product out there first, and even though your product was better when it was released afterwards, you might be might have lost time here. So yeah, don't underestimate the power of shipping. And lastly, with big growth comes big responsibility. I'd like to thank everyone again, and I'll be here for questions afterwards.
Great, thank you very much for sharing your story. I really enjoy listening actually to your tech stack. It's always interesting to see how other people are structuring their tech stack. We do have one or two questions, but because we're over time, what I'll do is I'll post those questions on the Slack channel. And if you've been invited, so it'd be great if you could come in and just answer those questions.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Thank you.
But thank you very much, Amanda.
No, thank you.
And up next, we have Shantelle Liu, who is the e-commerce UX designer at Zoom Video Communications, and she will be talking about UX localization design for the global audience. So welcome, Shantelle.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here and really excited about this topic. Let me just go ahead and share my screen. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, so today I'm going to talk about the user experience in the localization space. So we all know nowadays with like increasing demand in the global market, a lot of companies are kind of reach to other regions. But in the meantime, like we need to think about how we can localize and to provide the experience that's appropriate to other other part of the world. So before I start, I just want to give a quick introduction about myself. I'm Shantelle, a UX and UI designer. I came from a visual design background and kind of pivot my focus into more user-focused, user-centered design later in my career. And right now I'm working at Zoom as an e-commerce designer. I basically help our customer to easily buy and manage the Zoom products online. So I've been with Zoom over a little bit a year. And throughout my career, I have very lucky to have the privilege to work for some like large tech companies, small startups, as well as like freelance for nonprofits as well. In those like journey, I kind of learned like how to design at a scale for a large audience, not kind of cross globe, how you should deal with those like difference between the cultures, different formatting and things like that. So that's kind of like where I get very interested into like UX localization. And for my personal background, I was born and raised in China and came to the United States to study design and started my design career here. So living here as like a first generation immigrant, I'm constantly switching in between two languages. Half of the apps on my phone are in English, another half are in Chinese. And this gave me a very unique perspective and experience to kind of absorb how the companies do things differently in different regions, and give me an experience to kind of see, to kind of study and see the difference in the digital interaction within those two cultures. So as I design for a variety of people from different cultural background throughout my working experience, I just naturally develop empathy through the cultural similarities and difference in the digital world, and kind of dig deep into how, as a UX designer, we should do things differently for different regions. And one thing I have been noticed about UX localization is that's not something you can learn from a school or a textbook. There are limited resources out there to tell you what's the right thing to do. And then that's not something like you can learn from school either. So when like a UX student at school, you work on a specific problems with a limited use case, you focus on just like a small set of users. But when you enter the professional world, especially while working for a large audience, things will start shifting. You will need to take into consideration is beyond just a screen that you are working on. There are a lot of like factors you need to take into consideration, including cultures and the localization. So today I'd like to share some of my insights on localizing user experience and design. And I will talk about why this is so important to our users and the business, and what it means as a UX localization. And I will also share about the best practice from UI and the UX perspectives as well. So to start with, I'd like to share some data with you all. Research has shown the online population continues to grow at a rate of nearly 1 million per day. But only 9 out of 100 newcomers to the internet actually speak or write in English. And back in 1995, 90% of online content was dominant in English. But today, in 2022, only almost like a quarter, 25.9% of the online content are in English. So as we can see, English is no longer the dominant language in digital world, and this trend isn't unstopped either. We'll see a lot of like other languages, other popular apps pop up in other places as well. But in the early days of the internet, localization was often limited to like large tech companies, because they have the resources to kind of expand into the different region markets. So it was kind of a luxury things to do. But now the competition and the demand in the tech industry have particularly make localization like common standards. So everyone's doing that. If you are not doing it, you're kind of like falling behind. That's things I kind of feel right now, because everyone wants to get to the market research, to the like a region market. So they want to do this localization to kind of help the brand break into the local market easily. So you will say, okay, I think this is so important. Let's just translate everything from English to the local the languages the local market is user, and translate as many languages as possible. But hold on a second, before we kind of dive into too far, I want to take a look at an example here. So this is slider, you probably see in a lot of like places, the left side something low, some on the right side is a high setting, and when you interact with the slider, kind of change the setting that way. So this is a very like common and very familiar interaction you see in the internet. But however, it will be a totally different story in other part of the planet. In some countries, especially where they use right to left languages, the whole experience just like shift. It's kind of the mirror interaction. So the left-right languages such as like Arabic and Hebrew not only change the direction of the text compared to English, they also change the direction of the interaction too. So you can imagine how this will apply in other places as well. For example, we're all very familiar. If you want to go to the next page, the next button is usually located on the right side. But here, for those countries, the next button will be on the left side, because that's how they interact how they rate. So things are very different. If you just do a simple text translation, you will be really confused to those users. So my point here is UX localization is not as simple as just translation. It's more about like fit your design content to the usage habits of your target market rather than just like a simple word-to-word translation. And here is another example. This is something I worked on recently. Localization also affects our design decisions as well. So from this example I'm working on, you can see all of the micro copy we want to test on those buttons works fine in English. Seems like we'll just do the test and pick which one performs better and call out the day. But if that's the approach we're doing, now we kind of bring the issues when it comes to localization. So if we translate that to some other languages on the example showing on the right side, you can see we might run into an issue with those languages. Because some of the texts are too long, they couldn't even fit into our like mobile components. And that kind of brings the issue later down the road. So this will just require our UX designers to kind of think alternative solution. For example, we may use text links, for example, and also we can just take some content outside of the button and also move some information to other placements so we can see keep the CTA shorter. So the localization can also help us to make a design decisions which direction we need to go, and we can what kind of UI elements we can choose. And another example here is from Spotify. As you can see, they have this like playlist for each of the countries. But what they did is not like create an image and roll out in production for everyone. They kind of take the actual stops and change the design based on the countries. They not only change the images, and so it kind of represents the population in the target countries. Also, change the design, like the colors, so it kind of fits better with the image overall. So that can bring a totally different experience to our users, because if you see someone that's not really relevant to you, you might not pay attention to the content too. So that's why we need to take a localization seriously. And here's another example. Localization not only impact like small UI components or like the micro copy images, it also have the impact to like a large at a larger scale, all the way to like a product strategy level. So the example you are seeing here is the same brand, but the website looks different in different regions. The Muji American website has that really minimalist design approach. They focus on the product itself. They barely show like portrait images or like model's face. It's more about the products themselves. But on the right side, the Muji Japan's website, you see a totally different approach. It has not typical Japanese nesty style with a lot of nesty table and columns, and they showcase more about like the portrait images, a lot of lifestyle images on the website. The reason they're doing that because American is still establishing this brand to the audience. So what they need to do is to showcase the product themselves a little bit more. Instead of in Japan, it's like they are already like a well-established brand. What they need to tell the users know about what they offer about the products is more about the stories, the branding they're building. So they're taking totally different approach based on the local audience. And as we see from this example, localizing your user experience is a very complicated process. It's not just translation. You need to use correct like numbers, conventions, currencies, even adapt the UI to different like space requirements, verify the cultural appropriateness, and also change the graphic images all the way to product strategy level. etc. So now you are wondering, so what is UX localization exactly? In my opinion, UX localization means adopting international products for a specific region to create a relevant and appropriate experience for users. It involves everything from small things, basic level like translation, all the way to find the right meaning, tone, styles, and to all the details from how people pay, the term of service they read, the images, colors, icons, fonts, and the culture reference they see. So there are a lot of things involving in this process. And in some cases, you will also hear terms like cross-culture design, geo-design, etc. That basically is the same thing. It's all about the laying the groundwork for the apps, or the app set, or the website to meet global users' needs and expectation. And here are like the 4 foundations that's very important when it comes to localizing the experience. For the languages, besides the basic translation, you also need to kind of tailor your copy that kind of makes sense to the local audience. And also you need to be aware of the local laws, which can affect your design layout. Or oftentimes need to add a checkbox or have some sort of acknowledgement based on the legal requirement, or adding some sort of a legal disclaimer for certain countries. And so that's something you need to pay attention to. And the third thing is about interaction. So you need to adapt your interaction design based on the countries you are targeting to. And I will talk about it in more depth in a second. And then lastly is the culture. It needs to be play in a big role in our design consideration too. And with that being said, like what should we do better for like a UX localization? And I kind of will share some like best practice based on my experience. So if you are like a high level as like a manager, you need to understand that it takes a village to get a localization done. It's not just like a one person's job. You need to work with cross-functional partners and educate the people the importance of localization. Localization is not just part of the design process, it also affects how business worked in other countries or regions. As more and more designers have a say in the table right now, you need to get involved in early like planning phase, which up-level localization to a company-wide initiatives. And after you have the blessing from the leadership, you will need to build out a process to allow localization to be part of the design workflow. For example, target country and regions should be included in the creative brief or in the kickoff meeting. And the design variants need to be identified before the graphic production even starts. You will also need to set up some sort of rules on naming conventions or file handlings for those geo design variants. Proper like localization should really begin in the conception stage, and you can kind of divide the team, maybe a different designer can work on different regions. So you can have that like 360 user experience all at once. So you can kind of oversee what's happening in different places. And one of the most important cross-functional partners during localization is our legal team. You want them to be compliance. You want to use the knowledge to make sure your design is compliant to the local law. And another good partner during this process is our data science team. Because they can kind of provide the number to let you know the users you are talking to a little bit better. For example, some countries are more heavily on mobile, especially the APAC countries. So you might want to do mobile first strategy there versus in other part of the planet, like in the US or Western, maybe they're more heavily on desktop, or they are more likely use like email as the communication or login information. So you can kind of change your strategy based on the data you learned from the data science team. And the last one is to leverage the internal and external resources. So nowadays there are a lot of companies or like agencies to provide those like localization service for the design team. So you can let experts to do the job and outsourcing that. And even in Figma and in Sketch, there's some like plugins you can use to kind of streamline those processes as well. So that's something you can consider as a manager too. Next is some like suggestions or like tips for like UX designers. The first thing is to use the format that align with local users' habits. So you need to ensure supporting for things like local currencies, units, days, time, address format, and the times, etc. If you don't know how to do that, or if you don't even have a list where to even start it, you can kind of take local common design systems such as Google's material design, Apple's human interface. They all have some sort of guidelines for localization, especially on like right to left languages, things you need to consider when do the translation, etc. So those are good like a foundation for you to get started. And then the next is about the content, because it's not about like how you place things, how it looks. Sometimes we read the content and not have a big impact too. And because the content you have on the website or your product will be translated into so many languages. So you want to cause as less confusion as possible. So even if you are not directly involved in like copywriting and the content strategy, you can still provide the feedback and to ensure the products you design are free of some slangs or something that's just the local audience, a specific country can understand. For example, some phrases in English, like some phrases English native speakers will be very familiar with, like reading in dogs and cats, in example. But it will make no sense for those who are not not good at English, or worse, kind of have felt offended by those terms. So you want to use very clear, simple words like your product can accurately convey the intended meanings. I always say there's a golden rules when it comes to content design. So if your design can be understood by a 3-year-old, at the same time by like an 80-year-old old person, then it means your content is doing a good job, because it kind of reach more audience than you are intend to do. So that's something you need to consider too. And the next tip is to don't make any assumptions. If you have time and the resources, don't just do like a general user research and call a day. Knowing one countries, someone it gives enough information to from like legal or like a culture perspective, but it doesn't tell us the exact user behavior of that country. For example, I mentioned earlier in APAC they're heavily on mobile, but if you don't do the research, you don't know like which country is like more heavily on mobile. Like you want to change the strategy, and don't just make assumption to call the day. And then next, I have some tips for the UI designers as well. So the first thing, the easiest thing you can do is just to start testing with real copy. So when you put the real copy in, you can see some some of the design will break, and you have to adopt the design or like change the language you are using. And this is a very simple thing you can do. And as a basis, if when you don't have real copy, there's a general rules like for longer languages like German and Russia, it's like 30% longer than English. And for Asian characters like Chinese and Japanese, they're usually 30% shorter than English. So you kind of, if you don't have like real, if you only have a placeholder copy, you can just add a word like minus like 30% of the copy and play around in the layout to see if the design still holds. The next thing is in your handle file. You can make sure you need to make sure all of the components are unresponsive, so that can save you a lot of time. Because to solve the challenge of text length, a great way is to make sure the UI components are adaptable in all of the viewports. You want to use less of the bounding box or like constraint containers with fixed dimensions. So if you kind of spec things to have like flexible dimensions, that means the content can grow freely without facing any like constraints in a specific fixed dimensions. This include like this example, like buttons. If the call to action require like a really lengthy text, then you can consider other like alternative solution, like hyperlinks, things like that. So there's always a way for you to adopt, but you want to make sure when you hand off, the engineer knows that too. And the next thing is about colors, which plays a big part in our visual identity. A lot of nuances can be conveyed through like colors. And we oftentimes use colors to kind of signify different sections of the app and the website. And the colors have different meanings in different colors. For example, in Asian cultures, red usually means like good luck, joy. So it's a really good color. So you want to say a lot of Asian e-commerce is using red for like promotion or like a notification. However, in the Western countries, especially in US, red usually means something like stop, arrow, warning. So you want to say a lot of arrow message or like a warning message in red, which is totally different strategy like the Asian like designer would pick. Even in like a stock market, that's true. In China, the red means the stock is growing because the red is like a joyful color in that culture. However, in US market, red means the stock price is dropping. So those colors, you know, have a very different meanings in those countries. So when you are doing the design, especially you have to design for different cultures. Sometimes you have to adopt the colors, and so it conveys the right meaning for those countries. The next thing is about the icons. You want to use the icons very like wisely. Over the time, icons have become like standard representation of different elements, no matter the languages. Most of the icons are kind of globally recognizable, such as like close, save, trash can, etc. So when you use those icons, they kind of save you some like time to do the translation, and it's more like globally recognizable, make the UI more clean. That's that's something you can consider too, to kind of say if you can use some like icons to replace the text. But in the meantime, you have to also be mindful. You still need to consider like sometimes you have to mirror in those icons when you work on right to left languages. And the next thing is the orders. It kind of like very tied into my first point about use the right format for the local for the local market. In some like countries, when you ask for date of birth or any sort of date, it starts with months, but some countries start with day, some countries usually start with year. So if you just provide one UI, so not, I think the users can still figure it out, but sometimes it might cause confusion or then enter like a wrong date because the date and the month sometimes can be quite confusing. You don't know which ones represent. So you have to be kind of do some research to understand what kind of format that the target country is using and adopt the UI that way. And the last point is the images and the videos they're using. So when you're sorting the images and the videos, you have to want to avoid to show any symbolism or languages that might like make the local users feel offensive or like confusing. So in your creative team, if you don't have like a localization team yet, the easiest way you can do is kind of to host like a design critique across the company and kind of ask everyone from different culture background to kind of come to provide feedback. I was invited to kind of critique a Chinese New Year campaign. My previous company does, and by doing that, you can kind of understand, you can kind of easily get some like insights from someone familiar with that country and the culture, and then ask them to give the feedback. And I have been talking a lot of like tips. The last point I want to make is like people are far more familiar globally than you might expect them to be. Some places are more multilingual than you think. We are all human connected in some way at the end. So there are some like global shared familiars, like we all want to get things done quickly. We want the less noise on the page. We want a very easy and intuitive experience. So those rules are still applying. That doesn't mean like the localization will kind of take over those rules. You have to prioritize what's most important to our users. Even if we mess up something, that's okay. It's part of our learning experience. I always like to say for UX designer, we never get it right. Every time you improve something for the users, you are just one step closer to be perfect. The world is changing and we need to evolve too. So this is all my presentation. Thank you so much for listening. And if you have any questions, feel free to send them in the Slack channel. I'm happy to answer them there.
Great, thank you very much, Shantelle. That was really interesting and kind of a little bit overpowering. A couple of questions did come in, so I will post them in the Slack channel, just given the time, but I wanted to thank you. I thought it was very detailed and very concise, and I really enjoyed it. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
And if anybody else out there has any other anything else that they would like to share, questions, please do ask, and we'll pass those along to Shantelle. But what I am going to finish with is just a very quick plug, which has to be done, is kind of say, if you did enjoy that session that we just did, we are hosting a much bigger conference we'll have 25 plus speakers, 800 attendees, 8 workshops in the New World Stages Theatre in New York in May. If you enjoyed the content that you heard there, it's going to be the same kind of concept, but we'll have product, UX, design, and dev all together, because as kind of we've learned, it's all about how you get people to collaborate and work together is how you build the products that are going to be successful. So once again, apologies for the technical issues that we encountered, but I hope you enjoyed the event. And thanks again to Shantelle and Amanda for sharing their great insights, and looking forward to seeing you again soon. So thank you very much.